Well, as the Masters of the Universe Classics line continued, it was inevitable we were going to build up all of our factions. And next up was a figure that was going to build up a faction. And if you can't tell from looking at this picture, it's the Snake Man faction. And that figure was Rattler, who honestly is kind of one of the more badass of the Snake Men. Some of them can be a little goofy. I mean, tongue lasher and squeeze with the giant arms, but Rattler is just like pure awesomeness, and he's been around since the beginning. He doesn't have, the weird fall-apart armor like King Hiss or, again, tongue lasher with the, tongue of doom or whatever it was they said in the promo material. Obviously, Cobra Khan was around before them and then, became a Snake Man sort of after the fact. He used to be a Skeletor bad guy, but we were determined, and we didn't want to just build all the Snake Men from the original line, but in Classics, one of the longtime goals was to really add to the Snake Men, because the 2000X series made them amazing, and I particularly really fell in love with them from the 2000X series. So while we wanted to get to more Snake Men in time, we first wanted to at least finish the vintage ones before we, started inventing new ones. So Rattler was next up, and we had plenty of reference to go by because he came out late in the line when a licensor guide was put out, and we knew he was coming up and he was inevitable, so that's where the Snake Men 2-pack came from. Well, you might say, wait, what? What does the Snake Men 2-pack have to do with Rattler? Well, when we were doing the Snake Man 2-pack, we wanted to have two different Snake Men, and one of them needed an all-new body. So we specifically tooled up the body that we knew we'd be using for Rattler with the scales up and down the arms. So this way, when we got to Rattler, he wasn't as tooling intensive as he would have been if we had to tool up an entire new character. It's kind of a, working smart, not hard, if you will. And we figured this would be a way we could release Rattler with all of his armor and his neck piece and, all the bells and whistles. Well, we weren't counting on one factor in particular, and I'll get to that in a moment. But as far as which version of Rattler were we going to do, well, obviously with it being Classics, we heavily looked at the classic vintage figure, but there are people who really love Rattler and are, hey, maybe there's people who collect armies of Rattler. Obviously there are out there and want every variant from the vintage line and all the different deco changes and, different factory stamps. We obviously weren't going to get that deep, but we were going to start with the vintage figure as our base, as that's what all the Classics figures did. But as I noted, I really fell in love with the Snake Men myself from the 2000X series, because in the second season, when the show was renamed for the Snake Men, well, they got the center stage. And, we looked at other things. We looked at Rattler from the mini-comics, where he almost kind of looked more dinosaur-like than rattlesnake-like. And we looked at things like some of the other vintage, not licensor kits, but I guess, books, if you will, where Rattler had a yellow tail and had blue pants for reasons. And, we also looked at how he appeared, of course, in the 2000X series, where he had more armor and he had more of a, the long ripped loincloth. And it is interesting to note that the figure that was released in the 2000X line wasn't actually called Rattler. Rattlor, excuse me. He was called the General, like, General Maydeen. So he would be General Rattler. The reason being is a copyright issue. The word Rattlor was taken by another company at the time, so his name had to be changed. Luckily, by the time Classics came along, the name became free again, and we were able to revert him to his original name, something we couldn't do with Ninjor, but that's a YouTube video for another time. Either way, as I noted earlier, in the 2000X series, he was just awesome. He was super loyal to King Hiss. He was, basically, a by-the-book Snake Man. I mean, he didn't have any ambition of his own. He wasn't, trying to overthrow anyone. He was just doing his duty. In the Filmation series, he was a little bit sillier. He came along at the very tail end of Filmation. In fact, he missed out on being on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe entirely, and his appearances were on the She-Ra Princess of Power show. But since he was in development with Mattel at the time, the powers that be at Filmation decided to take some of the Snake Men and add them to the POP show. Tongue Lasher in particular got quite a makeover, including an awesome jetpack, which, come on, anytime a character has a jetpack, he's amazing. And, he and Rattlor were sort of these two Snake Men that joined the Horde for reasons. Yep, in POP, they were members of the Horde, not members of the Snake Men or members of Skeletor's evil crew. They were fully devoted to the Horde. And there's actually reasons for that. There's a whole other backstory from Classics, and it doesn't have to do with them wanting to turn Adora into a Wishbone, but it at least ties into the 2000X series and what was happening. It's discussed a bit on Rattlor's bio if you want to go check it out. I'll do a video soon. He did get a Filmation figure in the Club Grayskull line at the very tail end of Mattel working on Classics. Actually, I think that was Super 7 that put this one out once the license had gone to them. So we knew we didn't need to do a Filmation version of him because that we were holding that for that eventual line, which we kind of knew was eventually going to happen. So a hybrid was what we were looking at. It was going to be based on the vintage figure, but the idea is we would give him armor that could snap on so you could do a 2000X look on top. So this way, you could basically mix and match. If you wanted to display him without the armor and do pure vintage classic figure, hey, you could do that. And it also meant, of course, we had to give him a big tail, but again, because we had already tooled the basic body, we knew the tooling was going to allow us to do things like that extra armor. Because again, I love the 2000X look, and it really wasn't that hard to do with just a chest harness. We weren't going to do the whole, armbands and wrist and ankle armor, if you will. But, the shoulder armor and the harness was kind of enough to give it that 2000X flair. And if you like the 2000X figure that was called the General, well, hey, now you were going to be able to get an update of that, and you could display the figure how you wanted. One thing we wanted to make sure we got, though, was an homage to the vintage action feature, which was a snake neck or head that would launch out to be like a striking sort of neck thing. And this was pretty easy to do by doing a clip-on piece. You'll notice we also included a Horde armband as an homage to when he joins the Horde in Princess of Power, but it was removable, so again, you could display him how you want, as a Snake Man, as a Horde Snake Man, with the neck piece, without the neck piece. It was basically just like Mecha Neck, where you could snap it into place between the head and the neck peg, showing it elongated as an homage to the vintage action feature. And that armor that I was so excited to get, the Horseman sculpted it up, and he was ready to go, because we knew we could afford it because there wasn't much tooling. And then we saw the deco hits. Did not expect this. So Rattlor had so much deco on him because every scale had to be painted separately. And he had blue and yellow stripes going up and down each arm and leg. 2 yellow, 1 blue. Every single scale counted as a deco hit. It couldn't be done as one brush because of the way the scales were, which meant we could either include the armor or remove the deco from the arms and the legs. Well, we obviously knew we had to play with the money, and I knew fans were going to be upset if we removed the deco because that was sort of more sacrosanct. So I decided, as much as I wanted that armor, we were going to have to sacrifice it in order to do a true vintage figure deco, which I think I made the right call because releasing him without the deco would have looked really weird. And I think fans would have been like, wow, you sacrificed his traditional blue and yellow stripes just so you could have the armor? I already had enough fans mad at me. I didn't want to piss off another whole faction of them. So he shipped, he got his new bio, talking about his conversion to the Horde because of, Khan undermining him, basically. And for those of you who love the 2000X figure and wanted that armor to snap on in place, well, including me, well, we were all kind of out of luck. But never let a good toy guru down, because one thing I do is never give up and never surrender and constantly watch Galaxy Quest, because I was determined to find a way to make this look happen. Even if, fans were just taking the armor off of 2000X, the General, and putting it on the new Classics Rattler. Well, I wanted to do it right. And to do that, well, we had a solution. We turned to the Weapons Pack program. So if we'd gotten rid of the deco, well, you can never replace that unless we, gave out different arms and legs that snapped in or something. But with the weapons packs, we had a vehicle, if you will, to get extra accessories to fans. And some of the packs, as it evolved, while it started off all as repaints, we started being able to tool up new items because they were selling well enough to dedicate a little bit of tooling. And we already had Rattler's army sculpted. It wasn't tooled, but it was sculpted, so the sculpting was paid for, and that was a big thing too. It was sculpted at the time of Rattler, and so we were basically sitting on it for years until I was able to, based on the finances of the weapons pack, find a way to get it into a pack and release it and pay for the tooling. So we did that with the End of Wars pack, which I think that was the last weapons pack, yeah, if I'm remembering correctly. So it came out very late in the line, but it was definitely one of the better ones because it had, well, it had Cowl in it, first of all, who was tooled for it, and it had, well, Rattler's army and Strobo's gun. So you got like some really cool weapons and, you know, some new versions of He-Man's attire, his sword and his axe for what we thought would be the slime pit version of He-Man. And, of course, Strobo's gun that had to get cut because we couldn't afford to tool it at the time. We'll get to that when I get to the Strobo video. But either way, this let's try that again. Weapons pack really worked out because we got to tool some cool stuff and put out different version of Cowl, and Rattler was now going to have his army. Or army. You don't have an army, he's got armor. It's like I don't even have a script I'm going by, and I'm just making this up as I go along. Alright, well, cool weapons pack aside with Trapjaw pieces and Roboto pieces and Hordak, Hurricane Hordak pieces that are all interchangeable in different colors. For me, it was all about Rattler's armor. I had been waiting extra long years staring at this sculpted piece that we couldn't include with the figure because no one anticipated how high the deco count was going to be. And getting to finally put this out and put the armor on Rattler, to me, was a huge accomplishment because there were several years between the releases, between Rattler coming out and the armor coming out, and I knew we were going to get to it, but I had to find the right way to work it into the line. You can't just release something. You have to find a way to make it financially fit the puzzle in the P&L, the profit and loss statement, for those of you who haven't gone to business school. So, yeah, it wasn't as easy as just releasing it. And the great thing is you could have, you know, your version of him now. If you wanted the long neck, if you wanted 2000X, you wanted the regular one. It's one of the things that I loved about Classics was that we came out with accessories down the line that complemented older figures. And I think that's really what made the line so great because for longtime fans, they were getting payoff. And, you know, if you liked this version of Rattlor from 2000X, it took a little while to wait, but by the end of the line, you had it. And that was really cool, because not many toy lines do that kind of thing, where they pay off as you go, and it gets better. So, whatever version of Rattler does you best, you could now do them in Classics. And I was really proud of that, because this was a figure made with a lot of love, and I did really fall in love with the Snake Man from 2000X, and I wanted to do them right. So, another Snake Man down, and quite a few more to go. Classics was far from over. We were just getting started.